Well, joining me now are the Oxford PhD student Adam Elliott-Cooper, who supports the Rhodes Must Fall campaign to remove the Cecil Rhodes statue at Royal College, Oxford, and the writer and educationist Toby, who believes the real problem is that too few black students apply to Oxford University. Thank you very much to both of you for coming in. So let me start with this quote here from the Rhodes Must Fall campaign. We kind of took that campaign to DEFCON 3, if you like. The first point is, first, we want a reckoning. We want Oxford to acknowledge and confront its role in the ongoing physical and ideological violence of empire. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I certainly do. I think it's important for us to remember that the Rhodes Must Fall campaign began in Cape Town, South Africa. And it's a kind of a continuation of the racial justice campaign that took place in South Africa over previous decades. And this is really a solidarity movement.
That's quite a strong statement, isn't it? So do you agree with that particular statement?
Yes, I certainly do agree with it. I think that Oxford is implicated in the legacies of empire a great deal. I think that the legacy of Rhodes is one of those.
But the ongoing physical and ideological violence of empire, ongoing?
Well, if we think about the ways in which modern corporations such as the oil industry, Shell invests a great deal in Oxford University, and of course they are implicated in forms of imperialism in places like Nigeria and elsewhere on the continent. So I think it is important to recognise the ways in which Western dominance continues to shape African economies and political life to this day.
Okay, so Toby's gone way beyond the statue.
Yeah, like most people, I think, who went to Oxford, I'm quite sceptical about the Rhodes Must Fall campaign. I don't see why Rhodes should be singled out and not other historical figures who have views we would now disapprove of, like Churchill, like Gandhi. What about Hadrian's Wall? If Rhodes must come down because we disapprove of Rhodes for being a colonialist, why not Hadrian's Wall, which was, after all, built by a colonial empire?
But is it legitimate to use Rhodes to kind of broaden out the debate the way that Adam has done, to not just talk about the statue or historical figures, but the kind of racial balance of the global economy, if you like?
Well, I don't quite... It feels like they're trying to lever too much into this particular debate and make Rhodes stand for too much. And I think the problem with singling out Rhodes and mounting this campaign in Oxford and accusing Oxford of effectively endorsing Rhodes's views and imperialism in general is that it puts off black applicants from applying to Oxford. In 2013, only 35 black British Caribbean applicants applied to Oxford. Even if Oxford had admitted every single black African Caribbean applicant, British Caribbean applicant, they would still only constitute 1.3% of the total student population.
What's your response to that?
Well, I think there's two things. The first one is that I think that racial justice campaigns at Oxford University deter applicants to Oxford in the same way as racial justice campaigns in Britain deter immigration. They don't at all. In fact, they create a culture that shows there's vibrance, and I think that people applying to Oxford have to be quite naive to think it's some kind of racial utopia before they apply. I think the other thing is that all of these things around statistics and what have you, I recently read a report that was written by Oxford University called 100 Black Voices about black students' experiences, and one of them recounts a photo shoot on at their college. And upon seeing the people who were involved in the photo shoots, one of the tutors said, "Oh, brilliant, a woman and an ethnic." And I think that experience kind of speaks to the kind of reductive, somewhat superficial approach to kind of putting a few black faces in high places rather than the fundamental changes of the campaign.
Okay, well, the Prime Minister himself has weighed in on this. He wrote an article the weekend in the Sunday Times that basically black Britons are underrepresented in British universities. This is disgraceful and something must be done about it.
Well,
this is the Prime Minister.
It's not true if you enlarge the category to include black and minority ethnic students. Something like 20% of students at higher education institutions across the United Kingdom are black or minority ethnic. And in the 2011 census, the percentage of the British population, which was BME, was about 13%. At Oxford, the percentage of undergraduates who are black or minority ethnic is around 14%, which reflects the percentage at Russell Group universities if you strip out the Russell Group universities in London. So there's no evidence, if you enlarge the category to include black and minority ethnic students in general, to think that that Oxford is guilty of racism, Russell Group universities are guilty of racism, or the higher education sector at large is guilty of racism.
Would you argue with those numbers?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things. The first is that it's important to point out that 10% of that 13 to 14% of minority ethnic students are Indian and Chinese, rather than being Bangladeshi, Pakistani, or African Caribbean. And I think the other thing that it's important to point out is that this campaign is really about not having a few black faces in high places, because black people have been attending Oxford since the 18th century. There's nothing really new about that. But it's about really fundamentally changing the
affirmative
institutional
action
culture.
they have in the United States, basically putting in a quota?
I think that affirmative action in the United States has made African Americans an intellectual powerhouse in the world, and I think that Britain would benefit from that a great deal.
Very briefly.
You can't impose ethnic-based quotas.
They have in America, it seems to have worked.
But it's against the Equalities Act, which Labour brought in 2010. I think Oxford, the reason Oxford isn't racist is because Oxford is ferociously intellectually snobbish. Oxford wants the brightest students to apply, regardless of ethnic background, religious affiliation, or gender. And can I just get a plug-in for the unique Oxford summer schools? The closing application date is this Wednesday. If you come from a disadvantaged background, if you're at a school which doesn't have a track record of sending kids to Oxford, apply for a place. There are 875 places. It runs throughout July. It's entirely free. You get to spend a week living in an Oxford college and being taught how to perform well in the aptitude tests and in the Oxford interview.
Yeah.
The Oxford Outreach does an enormous amount to try and encourage people from disadvantaged backgrounds to apply.
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Toby Young, Adam Elliott-Cooper, thank you very much for coming in.